GOAT format's top decks of July are here, and yes, I know there was a lot of chaos, but wait, don't leave just yet, as there were in fact some interesting innovations that you're going to want to hear about to stay on top of the meta going into our next month of GOAT format. And as usual, we are going to talk a little bit about what adjustments you can make to counter this new meta going forward. Welcome to GOAT Duels, I'm ACP, and our biggest story of the month is definitely this first place Chaos deck by Anthony Alvarado, one of the most accomplished players in GOAT format. And I know some of the haters out there, you all are going to say, this is just a normal Chaos deck, why are we talking about this, who cares? But, in my opinion, this is not by any means just a normal Chaos deck. Check out these 3 Zombyra the Darks. Very powerful card in GOAT format that we did sound the alarm on in a short a few months ago, but Anthony Alvarado really took it to the next level with 3 copies in the main deck, so props to him. And Zombyra, at this point, we all know, this is one of the best monsters against a warrior deck, because 2100 attack really is king in GOAT format. It gets over all of their normal summon monsters, the Blade Knight, the Kaiku, the Ninja Grandmaster, etc. However, it's not that bad in the mirror. Now, I think with this list, Anthony was really focusing on using his card choices to crush the warrior decks and using his superior in-game skill to beat the mirror. But Zombyra, it's not that terrible in the mirror. It attacks over 1 Gravekeeper Spy. Not too bad. It'll still have 1900 attack. Maybe it'll get some more value later. And of course, it's easier to kill 1 spy than just 2. So maybe the Zombyra gets rid of 1 spy. Maybe later you have a Sork clean up the second one. Not too bad. But, I guarantee he tricked a lot of people who weren't expecting these Zombyras. And that is because with Chaos Sorcerer, it's got 2300 attack and 2000 defense. But most people actually put this card in defense mode the first turn that they summon it and banish a monster. And the reason that they do that is because they're trying to play around creature swap or something like Mystic Tomato, Giant Rat, etc. that can crash in and get some value. So people just default to putting their Chaos Sorcerers in defense without really thinking about it. And Zombyra takes advantage of that perfectly. You just attack over that buddy, which is pretty cool. Card Destruction is another card that I think was clearly leaning more towards beating warriors. Not so great in the mirror. However, one card that is quite good in mirrors is Trap Dust Shoot. We've got 3 copies, and 3 Dust Shoots has become a lot more popular lately. A few years ago in these Chaos decks, we didn't see Dust Shoot that much. It was maybe a side deck card, or maybe you mained 1 or 2. But more and more we see people just going all out and just playing 3 in the main deck, which is clearly for the mirror. The mirror is very popular. Now, to play these Zombyras, you'll notice we're only playing 2 spies, we're not playing the 3rd, and we're also not playing the Tsukiyomi. The Tsukiyomi, however, is in the side, you'll notice. I really like the side. It's very well put together, it's very ambitious, and you can see a really clear game plan here. Now, Anthony just actually doubled down on beating all the warrior players. He was like, just in case my main deck isn't good enough, I'm going to bring in 3 goats, 2 meta, a Tsukiyomi. The Tsukiyomi can attack over Blade Knights and Kaikus and that sort of thing. Bring in those Sakus. Maybe even bring in the Mobius and the Soul Exchanges. I don't know. I mean, I will say there is a lot of stuff that you can side out. Like, you're going to side out the crossouts. You're going to side out the Dust Shoots. You could maybe even side out some of the upstarts for the Warrior Mirror. Night Assailant is a card that you want to side out for Warriors. We've talked about that before. They've just got too many Blade Knights, which makes it awkward. So, yeah, I think Anthony definitely came prepared for Warriors. Mobius Soul Exchange is interesting. We did see Mobius Brain Control as a common pairing in the side deck in the past. The nice thing about Soul Exchange, though, is if you expect more of those Panda Burn decks, which we did see in the prior month, you can Soul Exchange their face-down Giant Rat, their face-down Panda, their face-down Death Koala, whatever it may be, summon Mobius. That is a pretty strong combo in that particular matchup. So I think Anthony really came prepared for Burn. I think he really came prepared for Warriors. And he definitely was able to use his matchup experience to beat mirrors. In that tournament that he got first in, I believe 2nd and 3rd place were also Chaos decks. So he did have to beat a lot of Chaos to get that first place finish, which is pretty impressive. One thing that I do want to call out, and we will talk about this later in the video, is I think this deck would have a very hard time against Goat Control. Zombyra is one of the worst cards you could draw up against Goat Control. The 2100 attack isn't really relevant. The fact that it can't attack directly against Goat Control is very relevant. And if the Tsukiyomi sucks it up, it'll be at 2100 attack, regardless of how many times Zombyra attacked, because it resets the stats. So that is going to be a bit of a liability. Notice also, we have no Book of Moons in the main deck or side deck, and we have no Tsukiyomi in the main deck as well, of course. So if we go back to this deck's history, Chaos really did originate as a control deck that really beat up on Goat Control, but those days are long gone. What we see is that these Chaos decks are now more focused on beating either the Mirror or Warriors, and Goat Control has been a bit forgotten, a bit slept on. People pretend like Goat Control doesn't exist anymore, but honestly, I think it's due for a comeback. So I definitely think you want to look out for Goat Control in the future as an option to capitalize on all the people sleeping on it. Next, I want to continue our story by looking at this first place Chaos deck from AJT BLS used in a 3v3 tournament. And I really just want to contrast it to Anthony's Chaos deck. Yes, these are two Chaos decks. They've got a lot of similar cards. Of course, we have Spy, Takochi, Thunder Dragon, etc. But this list is leaning in a very different direction than Anthony's. Anthony was saying, hey, I would like to use my tech choices to beat Warriors and use my matchup experience to beat the Mirror. AJT BLS was kind of taking the opposite approach, saying, I'm just going to main a lot of stuff for the Mirror because I think that's going to be the most frequent matchup. Now, again, we have 3 Trap Dust Shoots. Like we said, that's a very popular card choice. But we've got some other anti-chaos cards that I think synergize kind of well with Trap Dust Shoot. We have 2 Mind Controls in the main deck. We've seen that before. And what I like is that we can Dust Shoot our opponent, look at their hand, see, oh, maybe they've got a Magician of Faith, a Dakochi, and the Sangan, use Dust Shoot to send back the Sangan, and then know that our Mind Control will hit the Faith of the Dakochi. That's one example of the kind of play that we can do. So what we see here is that Dust Shoot, the info that it gives us, allows us to get more value out of the other cards in our deck. Same with Kaiku to an extent. We can maybe Dust Shoot back their Gravekeeper Spy and then start poking with Kaiku, get some stuff out of their grave. I also want to highlight Phoenix Windblast. I think the community is split 50-50 on whether Wingblast or Raigeki Break is better. I definitely like Wingblast better, and I particularly like how it synergizes with Dust Shoot. Talked about this before, but one play that we can do is we can Wing Blast some sort of threat and then activate Dust Shoot to shuffle that card into their deck so they don't just redraw it next turn. Or we can Dust Shoot first, look at their hand, and further capitalize on that info by Wing Blasting something and then having perfect information for 2 turns in a row. Now, one choice that I really want to call out here that has caught on this month and I think is going to continue into the next month is Spirit Reaper. Now, Spirit Reaper has always been played in GOAT format to some extent. It's a card with a lot of utility, and I think players are starting to remember just, oh wait, this Spirit Reaper card turns out is pretty good. And I like it in the Mirror to some extent just because, again, we have some synergy with something like Mind Control in that if our opponent just has a set monster, we can Mind Control it, say it's Dakochi, we flip it, draw a card, then summon Reaper, attack directly. So there's some great synergy there. And Reaper, you know, if you're up against Burn, getting under a level limit and Gravity Bind can be kind of nice as well. If you're up against Reasoning Gate, it kind of has a dual purpose in that we can set it to hopefully block an OTK, or we can poke directly with it and get a combo piece out of their hand. And Reaper, also okay against Warriors as well, just for its defensive capabilities. And sometimes if Warriors, maybe they don't have a monster in the early game, you might be able to summon it and hit directly there as well. As far as what that Spirit Reaper is replacing, that is taking the slot of Night Assailant, and Night Assailant has gotten a little less popular lately. We've seen some Chaos decks play 0, some Chaos decks play 1. You still have the Chaos decks playing 2, but we're seeing that 2 is a bit less frequent than it used to be. And I think in something like the Warrior matchup, you are going to get more value out of Spirit Reaper than Night Assailant. In the Mirror, I think it kind of depends. I think they're both pretty decent cards. But one thing that I've noticed about Night Assailant is it's what I'd call sort of a polarizing card in that it makes your good hands better and it makes your bad hands worse. If you have something like Graceful Charity or Card Destruction, yes, Night Assailant is really good. If you've got, say, multiple Phoenix Wind Blast, Night Assailant makes that hand better. But if you have like kind of one of these average hands, like say your opponent dust shoots you and you have a Dekochi, a Chaos Sorcerer, and a Night Assailant, they could just send back the Dekochi and now your Night Assailant isn't really doing a whole lot. And as players are using more things like Mind Control, Wing Blast, Kaiku, things that sort of deal with your threats while keeping your grave empty, Night Assailant does go down in value a little bit. Yes, you can always set the Night Assailant to kill a monster, but that's kind of your plan B. The main value that you want to get out of the card is getting a flip from your grave back to your hand. Overall, I like this list a lot. I think the monster lineup in particular is very well thought out, and if you're going into a tournament next month, I think one of the things that you want to be thinking about as a Chaos player is, do I want to play a build that is more tuned towards beating warriors, like Anthony's list, or do you want to play a list like this that is really dedicated towards beating the mirror? I think there are pros and cons to both. I think it's going to depend on what meta you expect as well as what your strengths are as a player. But before we go, I also want to talk about the side deck with this deck because I think there are some interesting things here. We have some standard choices. We've got Sakuretsu Armor, Swords of Revealing Light for the warrior decks. AGT BLS is obviously not giving up on warriors completely. We've got some other anti-warrior cards here like Berserk Gorilla and Cypher Soldier. And this is kind of interesting because, of course, Anthony went in the direction of Zombyra the Dark to beat warriors. And a few months back, we had a poll on the Goat Duels community about which of the three monsters you think is the best against warriors, Zombyra, Cypher Soldier, or Berserk Gorilla. The community thought that it was Cypher Soldier being the best, Berserk Gorilla being the second best, and then Zombyra being the third best. Now, I think results have, if anything, kind of shown that it's the other way around. I personally would lean more towards saying that Zombyra is the best, Cypher Soldier is the second best, and then I think Berserk Gorilla is the third best by a big margin. I think Zombyra and Cypher Soldier are kind of close, whereas I think Berserk Gorilla is really not that close. And Berserk Gorilla has some downsides in that it must attack. That's a very big one, because a lot of times with these big stat sticks against warriors, you don't want to tack into their Sakuretsu Armor, you just want to leave it in attack position as a wall, and that's not something that we can do with Gorilla. Of course, Gorilla is also an Earth instead of a Dark, which is a bit unfortunate seeing as we are playing a Chaos deck, and lastly, it only has 2,000 attack instead of 2,100, so that's why I'd really like to see these Berserk Gorillas just be Zombyras. However, I do think Cypher Soldier has some advantages that aren't really talked about. One of the big ones is that, yes, of course, the main purpose for playing the monster is that it gains a lot of stats when you battle a warrior monster, but I also like that we can set it to bait mind control, because if the warrior deck isn't maining mind controls, they're definitely going to side them in. So post-board against warriors, we'd have a lot of stuff to bait mind control. We could set Reaper, we could set Cypher Soldier, we could set Sangin, of course, and that really makes their life kind of hard, right? Even if we set Gravekeeper Spy, unless they're maining their own spies, all they'll be able to do is just mind control our spy, flip it, and then pass it back, and we can turn it to defense. And we could even side out some of the flips like the two Dekochis, and now all of a sudden their mind control is just kind of looking like a bad card. Also interesting is we've got two more Kaikus in the side in addition to the one in the main. So against your typical Chaos deck, we're actually going to have three Kaikus post side and just go kind of aggressive, I think. I think this side really takes the main deck and shifts it towards a more aggressive stance in pretty much all of the popular matchups. Again, though, you'll see that we don't really have a lot against Goat Control. Yes, we could bring in the second Tsukiyomi against Goat Control, which is nice, just to have another way to deal with Thousand Eyes Restrict, but other than that, not much. So here again, I think that this deck is sleeping on Goat Control a little bit, and you know, I think Goat Control is a deck that maybe a lot of Chaos players are just hoping they don't play against, right? They're hoping that they just run into mirrors and warrior decks, and if that gets taken too far, these Chaos players can get caught by surprise. And although I do like this list in the short term because it's great at beating the mirror, realize that in the long term, a deck can never be good purely because it beats itself. A deck has to beat other decks in order to be good. So when a deck gets to the point where it's just trying to beat itself, that's what we call inbred. And the more that the meta becomes inbred, the more room there is for either rogue choices like Chaos Return to maybe make a comeback, or sort of the long forgotten decks like Goat Control just playing a bunch of good cards that aren't being countered by the meta, decks like that can really come back and surprise people as well. And that brings us to our third deck of the month. This is a first place Goat Control deck. There are actually 2 Obelisk Blue tournaments, and both of them were won by Goat Control. I decided to feature the one that I thought was more interesting. One of the things that we've got going on here is 3 Royal Decrees in the main deck. I think this is a pretty good choice. I don't think it has to be 3. I think you could maybe also main 2. But Royal Decree is definitely one of the more underrated cards in the meta right now, because you have certain Chaos lists that are just playing too many traps for their own good, right? They might be playing 3 Jargrades and 3 Raigeki Breaks in addition to your standard traps like Mirror Torrential. Obviously, of course, your average Warrior deck is going to be playing, at least 12 traps, if not 14. So Royal Decree, good against those decks as well. And we have even seen Panda Burn be a little more on the map than normal, and Decree is great against that as well. And in particular, what I like about Decree in this meta is that the Chaos decks really only have like a couple of Raigeki Breaks or Wing Blasts, and of course like Ring of Destruction to deal with your Thousand Eyes. So if you have a Royal Decree and a Thousand Eyes Restriction play against your average Chaos deck, they're just not going to have a lot of outs to that. Yes, of course, they have their Chaos Sorcerer and their Tribe Infecting Virus, but then we're sort of forcing them to use up those power cards, which we can then deal with maybe another Thousand Eyes Restrict. So I like the overall strategy that we have going on here. You'll see it, we've got 3 goats, 3 meta, which I think is probably the best ratio to have right now. Thousand Eyes Restrict is just too good. You want to be playing 3 metas. And then if you're playing 3 metas, I think you want to be playing 3 goats too. Most of the aggro decks don't have a lot of ways to deal with a bunch of sheep tokens. In the main deck, they've usually just got 1 Tribe Infecting Virus. Yeah, goats aren't super great against Chaos, but they will still have to attack them. It buys you some time at a minimum. Then we've got 2 Creature Swap, which I think is pretty much also a staple in Goat Control these days. The nice thing about Creature Swap is it's great against Chaos decks, and it's good against Warrior decks. Those are your 2 most popular decks, so in my mind, you've got to main the Creature Swap. Swords of Revealing Light is a bit of a more unusual choice, but seeing as we're trap light in terms of, our defense here, I think having a Swords to fend off aggression can be nice too. Against Warrior decks, if you got a Decree and a Swords in play, they're just not really going to be able to do a whole lot. The monster lineup is kind of interesting. We've got a lot of sort of one-of tech choices here. We definitely have enough lights, which is good. Sometimes when you're building Goat Control, it can be hard to fit in lights. We've got like the 1 Merchant, the 1 Azura. We've even got a Zaborg. As far as other anti-chaos tech goes, we also have the 1 of Kaiku in the main deck, which I think is a pretty solid choice as well. Goat Controllers lately have been leaning more on the aggressive side. You'll see that we don't have a lot of monsters that we're just strictly setting, basically just the 2 Faith and the 1 Merchant. So depending on what kind of draw you get, you could actually make your opponent's crossouts kind of dead, which is an interesting thing to think about. Injection Fairy Lily is definitely an interesting choice as well. We have seen that on occasion in Goat Control decks before, sometimes even other decks like Chaos, surprisingly enough. Here, it's, I like a choice like this in Goat Control because I think against decks like Chaos, you want ways to really close out the game quickly, especially if you get a really aggressive draw. Maybe you deal with their set monsters with Crossout and Creature Swap, and then you can just use Injection Fairy Lily to end the game. We also do see that some Chaos decks even main Solemn Judgment, although it's not nearly as popular as it used to be, and Injection Fairy Lily is great at capitalizing on those control decks that are playing Solemn Judgment and just not being protective of their life points. We also have 2 Tsukiyomi in the main deck, and that is a choice that you really don't see in Goat Control much these days anymore. I think it's fine. I mean, I think maybe you could cut one for something else, but it's certainly not the worst choice in the world. And, if we're playing 2 creature swaps, we do want to have, maybe 2 or 3 spirit monsters, the other one being Azura Priest, which I've always liked. On paper, it seems like Azura shouldn't be that great. 1700 attack isn't really super strong, but against some of these control decks, it can be pretty nice. And again, we talked, of course, about how good Spirit Reaper is and how much utility we can get out of it. Spirit Reaper, it's going to do something in pretty much every matchup right now, so I like Spirit Reaper as well. We can get aggressive with it if we think our opponent has a bunch of crossouts in their hand. We can set it and know that it won't die in battle. Next turn, tribute for Zaborg or something like that. So I like Spirit Reaper as well. Side is kind of interesting, actually. We've got something like Tukaribo, which is standard. We've got King Tiger Wagyu, which is pretty standard as well, I guess, although maybe not so much in a Goat Control deck. Notice that we also have the Panda in the side, kind of, maybe this is doing a Xarian Universe impression in the Goat Control mirror. That's kind of an interesting tech choice that we hadn't seen before. I mean, if our opponent has 4 goats in play, this is going to be a 2800 attack trampler. So, yeah, in those goat control mirror matches or chaos control matchups, yeah, maybe just going Panda and beating our opponent down is the way to go. Use it in conjunction with something like Injection Fairy Lily, just do some attacking. Another option that we've seen before is the reinforcement of the army in the side with Zombyra and Mystic Swordsman level 2. So against your warrior deck, we can side in the Rhoda, the Zombyra, and the Exiled, have 3 Rhoda targets post-side. And then against Chaos, we do the same thing, except the Zombyra is replaced with the Mystic. So we've got a Mystic, an Exiled, and a Warrior Lady with the Rhoda against Chaos. I will say, if we want something else that's good against the other Goot Control decks, maybe go to like 2 Book of Moons. Notice we have no Book of Moon in the main deck, 1 in the side, so again, it's going to depend on what meta you expect. Here you'll also notice that we've got 1 Abyss Soldier in the main and 1 in the side. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I mean, Abyss Soldier's fine. It definitely used to be popular in Goat Control, but in a sense, I kind of feel like it went out of style as people found better options. So if we're looking for maybe an aggressive monster, maybe there are better ways to go. Like maybe we could just use more Kaikus. If we're looking for something that bounces back our opponent's monster, maybe Golem Sentry might be better than Abyss. But right now, I don't think you need to get hung up on every single card choice if you're going to play Goat Control. Just the basic package of Goat's meta, Royal Decree, Creature Swap, I think that is pretty good right now. I think the meta is just really not prepared to deal with that. So if you're someone who likes playing control decks and knows how to get good value out of these Metamorphosis and Creature Swaps, then I think Goat Control is really something that you should consider playing. I think it might be a better meta call than even a Chaos deck, and I think you might be more likely to take people by surprise and win a tournament with this if you're a good player. Last but not least, we've got this spicy library FTK deck by Rico Eichelberger. As usual, I apologize if I get anyone's name wrong, but this was taken to a top 8 in a 178-person Italian tournament, which is quite impressive. I believe this was an IRL tournament rather than an online tournament. But before we go any further, I want to talk about how this deck wins, because it is a deck that some people haven't seen before, and even when this deck was posted, there were some comments about, what the hell is this deck? How does it work? So this deck has a 2-stage game plan. The first stage is draw a bunch of cards and pay your life down. So we pay life using Toon Worlds, Archfiend's Oath, and Premature Burial. We repeatedly do that by using Giant Trinade to return those cards to our hand and reactivate them. And then once we get down to a low life total, 500 or less, and we've drawn most of the cards in our deck, we then activate Pendant, activate Reversal Quiz. Quiz swaps the life, and then the Pendant trigger will resolve afterwards, so our opponent will go to 500, then the Pendant burns them for 500, and the game's over. And we can do all of that on the first turn of the game using Royal Magical Library in conjunction with really Giant Trinade and the continuous spells to just draw a crap ton of cards. Now, a lot of GOAT format players have really strong feelings on this deck as a whole. I know some people will say, oh, the deck's garbage and you should never play it, it's a bad deck. Then you have some people on the opposite end of the spectrum saying, oh yeah, this deck is actually broken and we need to ban it because the deck is that good, it just beats everything. And I think part of the reason that people have such extreme opinions on this deck is because it is seen so rarely that it's hard for people to really base their opinions off of evidence, and instead they sort of default to emotion. I think the real truth is somewhere in between. I definitely think this is a top tier deck, but I don't think this is a deck that is absolutely oppressive and would take over the format if left to its own devices. Now, the reason that we don't see this deck online at all is because on Dueling Book, Convulsion of Nature is bugged in that it lets the player who controls it cheat and see all of the cards in their opponent's deck, not just the top card. So that is why Convulsion of Nature, to my knowledge, is banned in every online GOAT format tournament. even in the simulator that I'm working on right now, Goat Duels, Convulsion of Nature isn't in the game because it is a very difficult card to code correctly. So I've kind of been putting that off in favor of things that I felt are more important. Yes, we have Convulsion of Natures here in the deck, but I actually just used a little hack. This card is really DD borderline, as you can see over here. I just edited the HTML to change the card image. And the main thing that's different is the side deck. Here we have a transformation side, which I don't think I've really seen before in Library FTK. I'm not sure how well it works, only because I feel like there's more than 15 cards that we want to side out. The Quiz and the Pendants definitely have to come out. Then I feel like, the Feather of the Phoenix and the Spell Reproductions probably also come out. The Archfiend's Oath and the Convulsion Nature, you probably take those out. I mean, maybe some monsters you take out as well. I don't think we want all 7 of these monsters in our main deck. So maybe you take out some libraries and maybe you take out the Thunder Dragons. I don't know. I don't know exactly what the plan was here. I don't know how many times he transformed versus how many times he just left the main the same. I feel like in most matchups, you just kind of want to leave the main deck the same. The nice thing about this deck is that, again, since it's effectively banned online, people aren't prepared for it, even IRL, because people entering IRL tournaments are mostly copying online deck lists. So something like Curse Seal, the Forbidden Spell, isn't really going to be in anyone's side. Spell Canceller isn't going to be in most people's sides. So I think this deck is kind of just going to run over a lot of people who maybe don't even know that it exists, just because if you've been playing GOAT format for like the past couple of years only, then you just haven't seen this deck at all. So I always say that the best time to pull out an alt-win deck like Reasoning Gate or Burn or even Library is when people aren't prepared for it, when people forget that it exists. That, I think, is a really good strategy to have if you just want to give yourself a very disproportionately high chance of making top cut, and you just want to have a really high top cut frequency. Is just look at all the deck lists from the last month, see whatever alt-win deck people stop siding for, and then just play that. 1 month you're going to play Burn, the next month you're going to play Reasoning Gate, maybe the month after that you play an Empty Jar. That's probably what I would be doing if I was entering a lot of GOAT format tournaments. Now, the level choices in the side are interesting. We've got 2 level 8s. I think that's pretty good strategy, actually. I like the fact that in Game 2, if our first spell is a Reasoning, our opponent will go, well, I saw some libraries in Game 1, so I better call that. They're going to call level 4. You flip into, say, Dark Magician of Chaos, get back a really powerful spell, be in a really good position to win the game. I like the fact that we've got Cybersteins. I've always kind of thought that Cyberstein is kind of the most broken card in GOAT format that people aren't really playing. Obviously, we've already got Giant Trunades to clear the back rows for a Stein OTK, whether it's with a Gatling Dragon, a Master of Oz, or maybe you get like a Balter for the mirror, I guess. Dark Ruler Hot S, I think this should probably just be a Jinzo. Like, I think Jinzo is just better than this, but, it is what it is. We've got 1 BLS and no Dimension Fusions. I guess we're going to be leaving in some lights. I don't know how many Thunder Dragons we're leaving in, how many libraries we're leaving in, but we're going to have lights and darks. I will say that if we maybe move this Heavy Storm into the main deck over, over the swords, I think Heavy is fine in the main deck of Library FTK, then maybe we'd have extra room in the side for a 3rd Monster Gate. So I think the strategy could be fine-tuned a bit. You change maybe 2 or 3 card choices, and I think we'll have a pretty good deck on our hands here. And yeah, at some point, the bugs with Convulsion will get fixed. Library FTK will become legal online again. And this will be a deck that you'll have to watch out for, guys. I hate to say it. Thanks for watching this video, guys. If GOAT Control is a deck that you want to investigate further, then I highly recommend clicking on this video here, which is about how to play GOAT Control in the 2023 meta.